My name is Claire Weston. I used to think life gave you warnings, little signs, whispers in the silence that told you something was about to break. But that day, standing on the grass with my heels sinking into the earth and my daughter's diploma still warm in her hands, I realized life doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it shouts when your back is turned. It was supposed to be her day. The culmination of late-night study sessions, caffeine-fueled panic, tearful phone calls when she doubted herself, and the kind of pride only a mother can carry like breath. I watched her hug her grandfather, cheeks flushed with happiness, while camera shutters clicked around us. Everyone looked so polished, sunlight dancing on freshly ironed suits and pastel dresses, smiles wide and rehearsed. It was a day we'd imagined for years. I smiled too. I posed beside my husband, our daughter between us, her joy anchoring me to that moment. I didn't flinch when his hand rested lightly on my back, like he'd done it a million times without thinking. But I knew better. Every movement from him now had purpose. There were no accidental gestures anymore. Not since I found the messages. But I waited. I didn't speak, didn't accuse, didn't ruin what I knew was sacred for her. I let him have his charade because today wasn't about him or me. It was about her. And yet, in a single breath, he made it his. I think it's time we told everyone. I'm leaving you, he said. Just like that. No softness, no regret. Just steel in his voice and a well-rehearsed timing. Loud enough for cousins, aunts, and old friends to hear. Gasps floated into the open air like balloons let go too soon. I didn't turn to face him. I didn't need to. I felt the blood drain from my arms. My breath pauses in my throat, but I didn't break. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. I had been preparing for this moment. He didn't know that yet. And as everyone stared at me, waiting for tears or fury, I stood very still, because I knew something he didn't. Time slows in strange ways when someone tries to humiliate you in public. You don't hear the words all at once, they arrive in pieces, like glass falling from a shattered frame. First the sound, then the sharpness, then the silence that follows. That's what it felt like after he said it. I'm leaving you. The words hovered between us, and for a moment, I could feel them pressing against my chest like a hand trying to force its way in. Around us, people shifted awkwardly. His mother looked away. My cousin muttered something about needing to use the restroom. The photographer, bless his heart, froze mid-snap, camera still raised like he'd stumbled into something intimate and ugly. Our daughter turned to look at me, confusion clouding her features, a wrinkle forming between her eyebrows that had never been there before. She was still holding her diploma. That felt the cruelest part of all. I didn't say a word. I looked straight ahead and breathed through my nose like I'd practiced. That breath was everything. It carried months of grief, weeks of planning, days of pretending. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my mind, but now that it was real, I understood something deeper: how betrayal never truly prepares you for the sting of public exposure. No matter how much you know, it still cuts when others are watching. He was waiting for a scene. That much was clear. He wanted me to crumble, to yell, to make it easy for him to spin the story. The abandoned husband, the neglected man. Poor him. But I wouldn't give him that. Not now. Not here. Not in front of our daughter. So I did what he never expected. I stayed quiet. Not out of shock, but strength. Let the world guess what I was thinking. Let him believe he had the upper hand. He'd played his move, made his grand exit in the form of a public confession. But what he didn't realize, what he had never even thought to consider, was that I'd already started writing the ending. And it didn't have his name on it. It started with something so ordinary: our bank statement. I was trying to reconcile a charge I didn't recognize, something small from a hotel in the city. We hadn't been there in months, and he always insisted he hated staying downtown. Too much noise, he'd said once, too many people. But there it was, a single night at a boutique hotel, one I knew offered couples packages. I remember staring at the screen, my gut twisting in that way it does when something isn't quite right, but you're too afraid to say it out loud. I clicked into the email account we shared. He was careless. He'd never logged out of his synced inbox. Maybe part of him thought I'd never look, or maybe he believed I wouldn't understand what I saw if I did. But the truth is, When you live with someone long enough, you learn to recognize the tone of their voice even in text. And his tone had shifted. The subject line read, "Can't wait for Thursday." At first, I thought it was a meeting. Then I opened the thread. It wasn't a meeting. It was her. A co-worker. The kind he always said he couldn't stand. Too loud, too flirty. Funny how the people they claim to hate are often the ones they hide in plain sight. The messages were flirtatious at first, almost juvenile. But as I kept reading, they grew darker, more serious. Plans, jokes about me, ideas for vacations they hadn't taken yet but already dreamed about. A whole life he was building while coming home to mine. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just sat there. Still, there was something freeing in knowing. The lie had shape now. It had a name, a face. And I knew in that moment I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to scream or beg or demand explanations. I was going to prepare. That night, I smiled across the dinner table as he told our daughter how proud he was of her. I watched him reach for my hand as if nothing had shifted, and I let him believe it, because the most dangerous woman is the one who knows the truth and says nothing. After I found the messages, something strange happened. I began to see him more clearly than I ever had before. Every touch, every word, every gesture felt rehearsed, like he was performing a role and I was the only one who knew the lines were fake. I'd watch him kiss our daughter on the forehead before she left for class, or pour me a second glass of wine after dinner, and I'd wonder how long he'd been practicing this part. How many scenes had I clapped for, thinking they were real? He became, oddly, a better husband after the betrayal. More attentive, more affectionate. He started cooking again, playing the old jazz albums I used to love but hadn't heard in years. He even bought me a necklace, a delicate gold piece with a tiny charm he said reminded him of our wedding day. I wore it to bed that night and stared at the ceiling, feeling its cold weight against my chest like a lie I couldn't take off. But I smiled through it all. I thanked him. I laughed at his jokes. I let him believe I still believed, because I knew what he was doing. He wasn't loving me, he was laying the foundation for his exit. If he could just play the perfect husband long enough, he could rewrite the story, make me the villain, the ungrateful wife, the cold partner. And when he finally left, he could say, "I tried. Look at all I did for her." It's a trick as old as time, make them doubt their own worth so your betrayal seems justified. But what he didn't know was that I'd stopped doubting myself. The moment I saw those messages, that was the turning point. Not when he cheated, but when I realized he thought I was still in the dark. So I watched. I listened. I kept records. I paid attention to where the money moved, how often he stayed late at work, what documents he left on the kitchen counter. I tucked it all away, not out of spite but survival. He thought he was orchestrating his clean break. What he didn't realize was that I'd already begun quietly unraveling the knot he'd tied around both our lives, and I was doing it without making a sound. I didn't tell anyone, not a single friend, not even my sister. People mean well, but sympathy can be a weight when you're trying to stay focused. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity, and I needed time. He once told me that his lawyer, the one he used for his clients, was the sharpest in the city. Ruthless, he said with a kind of admiration, the way men speak about other men who get what they want without blinking. So that's who I called. Not for him. For me. I sat in the lawyer's office, calm and composed, and slid the papers across the desk. Deed transfers, asset listings, powers of attorney. We went through every joint account, every property we'd acquired, every tiny corner of the life we'd built. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I asked all the right questions and took all the right notes. His lawyer, now my own, didn't flinch. She'd seen this before. She asked me if I wanted revenge. I said no, I wanted safety. I wanted peace. I wanted to make sure that if he tried to walk out with everything, he'd find the doors locked and the keys gone. Within 2 weeks, the house was under my name only. A clean, airtight title. The savings had been split and moved. Quietly, legally. Everything was done with care, precision, and documentation. Not a single line he could contest without unraveling his own story. I knew it wouldn't stop the heartbreak. None of this could. But it gave me something else, a foundation to stand on. Because I understood now, more than ever, that love and protection are not always the same thing. I had loved him, but now I had to protect myself. Not from him exactly, but from the version of him that believed I'd simply disappear into the background while he rewrote the future. I kept the documents in an envelope, tucked inside my bag. I carried it everywhere, not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I needed to be ready if whenever came. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it would. I chose the envelope carefully. Nothing dramatic, just a plain manila folder with a brass clasp, the kind you'd use for school forms or old receipts. It didn't look like much, which made it perfect. I didn't want it to draw attention. I wanted it to sit quietly in my bag, a silent boundary between what he thought he could take and what I'd already claimed. Inside, it held my insurance policy, not for life or health, but for dignity. The title transfer of the house, the separate banking arrangements, a list of accounts, passwords, and legal filings, signed and notarized. It held copies of emails, receipts from hotel stays I never went on, and screenshots of messages with timestamps he'd never be able to deny. I didn't plan to use them unless I had to, but just knowing they were there steadied me every day. I carried it like armor. Grocery store runs, board meetings, our daughter's senior project showcase, I never left home without it. It became this strange comfort, like a secret that whispered, "You're not powerless anymore." I'd feel its weight when I reached into my bag for my keys or lip balm, and it reminded me, no matter how perfect he pretended to be, I wasn't pretending anymore. There were nights when I'd sit alone at the dining room table, the envelope in front of me unopened. I'd run my fingers along its edges, trying to decide if this made me heartless or simply prepared. The truth is, I didn't want this to be our story. I didn't want to be the woman with a folder of evidence, waiting for her husband to implode, but he chose this. Every lie he typed, every kiss he gave someone else while telling me he loved me, every quiet dismissal of my instincts, he packed that envelope himself. I just sealed it, and I waited, not with anger, but with certainty. Because when people underestimate you, they don't see the moment coming. They think silence is surrender. But I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was ready. I don't remember walking across the lawn toward him. I only remember the sound of our daughter's laughter still echoing in the air as it abruptly faded. Her friends were hugging, taking selfies, tossing caps into the sky like confetti. Life was happening around us, and yet everything in me was still, detached, but aware, present, but distant. He had just said it, so calmly it could have been mistaken for a weather update. "I think it's time we told everyone. I'm leaving you." His tone wasn't cruel, not obviously. It was measured, as though he believed his timing was thoughtful, as if delivering a public blow on our daughter's graduation day was somehow noble, a favor, even. He stood a little taller after he said it, like a man relieved of a secret. But he forgot something. This wasn't a secret. Not anymore. I didn't react right away. I let the weight of his words settle in the air, let the silence stretch until he began to shift uncomfortably. That's when I reached into my bag, calmly, deliberately. I didn't rush, didn't raise my voice. I simply pulled out the envelope, the one I'd carried like a second skin for months, and handed it to him. "That's fine," I said, meeting his eyes without blinking. "But you're leaving with nothing." He blinked first. His hand hesitated as he took the folder, as if it might burn him. He opened it. I watched his face as he flipped through the pages. At first, confusion, then disbelief, then color drained from his cheeks so quickly it was almost theatrical. I had to resist the urge to look around, to see who else was watching. But I knew they were. You can always feel it when the crowd shifts. He looked up at me, furious and humiliated, lips parting, to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned my gaze back to our daughter, still holding her diploma, still unaware that the story of our family had just cracked wide open. I didn't feel powerful. I felt steady, and sometimes steady is enough to shift everything. He began to unravel. Right there on the grass, in front of everyone. 81st, he tried to laugh it off, told people I was being dramatic, that I'd misunderstood everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. He looked down at the papers again, flipping through them with shaking fingers, trying to find some detail he could argue, some crack in the foundation. But there weren't any. I had made sure of that. Every transfer, every signature, every timestamp had been triple checked. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. Legal, binding, and unshakable. And the truth is a hard thing to hold when you're used to lying your way through life. He turned red first, furious, humiliated, then pale. The kind of pale that comes when control slips through your fingers and you realize for the first time that you're not the one steering the wheel anymore. He looked around, desperate for someone to side with him. But they weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. Our daughter stood frozen nearby, her smile gone, confusion painted across her face. She looked from him to me and back. Again, I wanted to run to her, to shield her from this moment. But I knew I couldn't. She deserved the truth too, even if it was ugly. He started raising his voice then. Accusations, denials, blame. He tried to make a scene, said I had manipulated him, that I'd been planning this all along. But no one moved to comfort him. No one jumped to his defense. The crowd stayed silent, uncomfortable, watching, unsure. They had heard his announcement minutes earlier. They knew who fired the first shot. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Silence is powerful when the other person is screaming. It reveals more than words ever could. And in that moment, he showed everyone who he really was, not the devoted husband, not the loving father, but a man exposed and scrambling. I stood there, grounded in everything he didn't expect from me. My calm, my preparation, my refusal to break. And while he flailed in front of the people he thought would support him, I finally understood what it meant to be free. I think he believed that if he yelled loud enough, he could rewrite the narrative. That somehow, raising his voice would erase the evidence in his hands and the shame curling up his spine. But volume doesn't drown out truth, it only echoes it louder. He kept going, voice strained, calling me vindictive, accusing me of scheming, said I'd ruined our daughter's day. That was the line that stopped me cold. He had the audacity to say I ruined it. I looked at our daughter then, really looked at her. She was no longer confused, she was heartbroken. Her expression had changed, hardened. There was no side she wanted to take, no parent she wanted to protect. She wanted her moment back, the one he had stolen. She stepped forward, and for a brief second I braced myself. I didn't know what she would say, or if she would say anything at all. But she looked at him, her father, who moments earlier had smiled beside her in photos, and said with a voice so steady it made my knees weak, "You ruined my day, not her." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. It was the first time in the entire scene that he was completely quiet. He stepped back then, not physically, but emotionally. Something in him folded, not defeat exactly, but recognition. He couldn't spin it anymore, not with her standing there, looking at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. He turned away. I didn't follow. People began to drift off, some murmuring condolences, some avoiding eye contact entirely. No one said much to him. The silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was discomfort, embarrassment, judgment, and it wasn't directed at me. I stood still while the sun dipped lower, the light golden and soft around the edges. Our daughter slipped her hand into mine, and I held on like it was the only thing anchoring me, because in that moment, it was. He walked away eventually, carrying nothing but that envelope, the one he thought would never exist, and I stayed, carrying something he could never take, my dignity, my voice, and my daughter's quiet understanding of where truth really lives. We drove home in silence, the kind that isn't heavy, just necessary. My daughter sat beside me, her diploma tucked carefully in her lap, the corners slightly bent from the way she clutched it during the chaos. I kept my eyes on the road, both hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying everything. Not out of regret, but out of awe. Not at him, at me. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. White shutters, the porch light still flickering like it always did. Nothing had changed, but everything had. This was my house. Now, in name, on paper, and in truth. I walked through the door with a strange calm, one I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I'd lived bracing for the next blow, waiting for something to crack. But not anymore. She followed me into the kitchen, and we stood there for a while, not saying much. I made tea. She changed out of her gown. We moved slowly, gently, as if our home needed time to settle around its new shape. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the envelope one last time. I didn't need to read the documents. I knew every line by heart, but I wanted to see them, to remind myself that none of this was imagined, that I hadn't just survived, I had protected myself, quietly, completely. I thought about him, about how certain he'd been that I would fall apart, that I'd cling to the life he was planning to leave behind. But in the end, he left with nothing, no property, no leverage, no carefully crafted story to hide behind. Just the echo of his own arrogance. He wanted a clean exit. Instead, he got the truth unfolded in public, witnessed by family, sealed. In my silence, as I turned off the light and lay down, I felt the bed shift beneath me. Not with grief, but with relief, with space. Because this chapter is mine now. Not the one he tried to write, but the one I reclaimed word by quiet, powerful word. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without bracing.